The restaurant smelled like money. That particular kind, cedar and leather and something floral I couldn't name, that only exists in places where the cheapest thing on the menu costs more than my first week's paycheck did, back in 1987. I stood at the entrance in my canvas jacket and my beat-up Rockports, holding a paper bag with a birthday card inside, and I watched my son-in-law glide across the marble floor like he owned the place. He didn't own it. He managed it. There's a difference, though I'm not sure he ever understood that. Dad. He said it the way you say a word you've repeated so many times it's lost all meaning. Flat. Practiced. His eyes swept over me once. Jacket, shoes, bag, and something shifted behind them. Not embarrassment exactly. Something colder. Hey, Conrad, I smiled. Thought I'd stop by. Meredith said you had a quiet Tuesday. My daughter had called me that morning. She'd sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She'd mentioned the restaurant, mentioned Conrad's name 3 or 4 times in the span of a minute, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves of something. I'd listened and said I'd come by for lunch. Simple as that. Conrad stepped toward me slightly, lowering his voice. This isn't really a good time. I just want a table, I said. A sandwich. Maybe the soup if it's good. We have a full house tonight. He glanced over his shoulder at the dining room, which I could see clearly held maybe a third of its tables occupied. A Tuesday in October. I understood the math. Conrad, I'll have someone call you a cab. He was already lifting his hand toward one of the young hosts near the podium. The bar on Clement Street does a good lunch. Very casual. More your speed, more your speed. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of San Francisco. I've reviewed infrastructure proposals worth more than this building. I raised a daughter on my own after her mother passed, worked double shifts so she could go to UC Davis, drove 4 hours each way to every parent weekend because I wanted her to know she wasn't alone in the world. And this man, this 38-year-old in a slim-cut suit with product in his hair, was telling me the bar on Clement Street was more my speed. I looked at him for a long moment. All right, I said. I'll head out. I turned, pushed back through the heavy glass door, and walked to my truck. I sat there with the engine off and the birthday card on the passenger seat. Meredith's birthday wasn't for another 2 weeks. I'd bought the card that morning on impulse, thinking I'd leave it with Conrad to give her. A small gesture. The kind of thing fathers do. I drove home, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Here's something I never told anyone until recently. When Meredith first brought Conrad home, this was going on 7 years ago now, I tried. I genuinely tried. He was sharp, well-spoken, knew wine and architecture, and had opinions about everything. Meredith laughed differently around him. More freely, I thought, or maybe I just wanted to think that. But there were small things. The way he'd redirect conversations about my work. The way he'd smile at my truck in their driveway like it was a joke only he was in on. The way he talked about Meredith's goals as though they were his to approve or deny. My grandson, James, he just turned 5, started calling me Pop-Pop about a year after he was born. Conrad made a face every time he heard it. Maybe just Grandpa, he'd say. It's more dignified. As though a toddler's nickname for his grandfather was a matter requiring dignity management. These were small things. I told myself they were small things. I didn't want to be the difficult father-in-law. I didn't want Meredith caught in the middle. So I kept quiet and I kept showing up every birthday and every holiday with my canvas jacket and my beat-up Rockports. And I told myself that love is a long game and that patience matters more than pride. I believe that. I still believe it. But there are limits. The limit came 2 weeks after the restaurant. I was picking James up from his soccer practice. Conrad was working, Meredith was at her nursing shift, and I'd volunteered when I got a call from my daughter. She was crying, not the surface kind. The deep kind, where you can tell she'd been holding it a long time before it broke through. Conrad had taken out a second line of credit on their house, without telling her. $40,000. He'd told her it was for the restaurant, for some renovation project the ownership group had approved. But the ownership group, when Meredith called to ask, had no record of any such approval. The money was gone. I sat in the parking lot of the soccer field, watching James kick a ball back and forth with a coach, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, though it was there. Something quieter, more deliberate. I'm coming over, I told her. Dad, you don't have to. I'm coming over. I want to be clear about something. I didn't go over there to fight. I didn't go over there to confront Conrad or deliver some speech or play the hero. I went over there because my daughter was crying, and her son was kicking a ball around in the fading October light, and someone needed to show up. That's all. Conrad wasn't home. Meredith sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bank statements, and the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle they didn't know they'd agreed to play. I sat across from her. I didn't say much. I looked at the statements. I asked questions, careful, specific ones, the kind I learned to ask in 30 years of reviewing city contracts and infrastructure bids. Numbers are a language. When you know it well enough, the lies stand out like misspellings. By the time Conrad came home at 9:30, I had a clear picture. He walked in, saw me sitting at the table, and his face did something complicated. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said. "Sit down, Conrad." He looked at Meredith. She didn't look back. He sat. I told him what I'd found, not dramatically, not with volume. Just the facts, lined up in order, the way you present findings in an engineering report. The dates, the transfers, the account that neither of them shared, the one where a significant portion of those $40,000 had gone. The way certain figures matched the down payment window on a property listing I'd found on his phone's browser history, which he'd left open on the kitchen counter when he went to get water. He tried 3 different stories in the span of about 10 minutes. Each one collapsed under a single follow-up question. By the time he stopped talking, the room was very quiet. "I think," I said, "you should stay somewhere else tonight." He looked at me with something between contempt and disbelief. "You don't get to make that call." "No," I agreed, "but she does." We both looked at Meredith. She took a breath. She said, "Go." I want to tell you that everything got easy after that. It didn't. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I've watched my daughter live through. Conrad didn't go quietly. He had lawyers, or threatened to. He told stories about me to mutual friends, that I'd always hated him, that I'd manipulated Meredith, that I'd been looking for an excuse to tear their marriage apart. Some of those people believed him, at least for a while. People believe what's simplest to believe. Meredith wavered. Of course she did. 7 years is a long time. James loved his father, the way children love their parents without conditions or asterisks. There were nights she called me at 2 in the morning just to cry and not say much. I stayed on the line. Sometimes that's all you can do. I had a friend from my city engineering days, Hewitt, who'd gone into private forensic accounting before he retired, and I asked him to look at what I had. Just look, nothing formal. He looked. What he found went beyond the $40,000. The ownership group that ran the restaurant, 3 partners, one of whom was Conrad's college roommate, had been managing their books creatively for about 2 years. Vendor invoices that were significantly inflated, payments to contractors that didn't exist, a supply contract with a company Conrad had quietly incorporated in his mother's name. It wasn't just Conrad, but Conrad was, to use Hewitt's word, central. I sat with that information for several days. I thought about what I wanted to do with it. More accurately, I thought about what Meredith would want, what James would need. What kind of ending, if there is such a thing, allows people to rebuild without the ruins poisoning the groundwater? I made 2 decisions. The first was to bring the documentation to a lawyer who specialized in marital asset recovery. Not for revenge, for protection. Meredith had her name on that house. She had rights, and she needed someone in her corner who understood how to enforce them. The second was harder. I called the California Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control. Not anonymously. I gave my name. I told them what Hewitt had found regarding the restaurant's financial reporting and its ABC license compliance. These things are connected in ways that aren't always obvious. The ABC takes its licensing seriously. They referred the matter to the appropriate parties. I didn't call Conrad. I didn't warn him. I didn't want drama or confrontation or the satisfaction of watching him react. I just made 2 phone calls, and then I went and picked James up from school, and we got ice cream. And he told me about a dinosaur he'd learned about that had armor on its tail, and I listened like it was the most important thing I'd heard all year. Because it was. It was a Thursday afternoon, late November. I was having lunch by myself at a diner on Irving Street, the kind of place with laminated menus and coffee that gets refilled without asking, when Meredith called. "The restaurant is closed," she said. "Tell me." The ABC had come in the previous Friday for a compliance review. What they found had prompted a more extensive inquiry. The ownership group had, by Monday morning, received notice of suspended operations pending investigation. Conrad's college roommate had already retained separate counsel, which in legal terms is a fairly clear signal about how people calculate loyalty under pressure. Conrad had been placed on administrative leave. Meredith's voice was steady in a way it hadn't been in a long time. "He called me this morning," she said. "He wanted to know if I'd talked to anyone." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd talked to a lawyer." I smiled at my coffee cup. "You doing okay?" I asked. There was a pause. "I think so." "James asked why Dad wasn't coming to Thanksgiving. What did you say?" "I said Dad and I needed some space, and that it wasn't James's fault, and that Dad loved him." I didn't say anything. She'd done it right. Exactly right. In fact, the thing I'd quietly hoped she would say, and hadn't wanted to suggest because it had to come from her. "Do you want to have Thanksgiving here?" she asked. "Just us and James?" "I'll bring the pie," I said. Some months have passed since then. The legal process, if you've ever been through one, is slow and unglamorous. It involves a lot of paperwork and waiting and phone calls from lawyers who speak in careful conditionals. Conrad and Meredith are in the process of divorce. The house question is still being sorted. The investigation into the restaurant's finances is ongoing. I don't know exactly how it ends. Nobody does. What I know is that last Saturday, James and I spent 4 hours building a birdhouse in my garage. He's 5, so building is generous. Mostly he handed me nails and asked why wood floats and whether birds dream. I answered every question as honestly as I could. At one point he looked up at me with paint on his chin and said, "Pop Pop, is this going to be a good birdhouse?" "I think so," I said. "We made it careful." He nodded, deeply satisfied with that answer. When my daughter picked him up that evening, she stood in my doorway for a moment with her coat still on, and she said quietly, "I should have seen it earlier." "You saw it when you could," I said. "You tried to tell me." "I didn't try to tell you. I just stayed close." She looked at me for a long moment. The porch light caught the tired around her eyes, the kind of tired that's slowly turning into something else, something stronger. "Thank you," she said, "for not making me feel stupid." I hugged her. She's 41 years old, and she's been through something real, and she's still standing, which is the only thing I ever hoped for. There's no clean ending to this. No bow. Conrad is somewhere out there dealing with the consequences of choices he made. My daughter is rebuilding, slowly and honestly, the way people do when they stop pretending the foundation was solid. James is 5, and he thinks birds might dream, and he builds birdhouses with his grandfather on Saturday afternoons. Some things break. Some things, if you're patient and you stay present, and you don't let your ego outpace your love, can be put back together from the pieces that remain. That's the thing they don't tell you about being a father. It's not one dramatic moment. It's just showing up again and again in the canvas jacket and the beat-up shoes, until the person you love most figures out she deserves better, and when she does, you say nothing about having known it all along. You just go get the pie.